All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Carlos Bossard. I'm the Director of Programs and Museum Practice at the Haitian American Museum of Chicago. Our mission is to promote and preserve Haitian art, culture, history, and community in Chicago and beyond. Tonight's program is a artist talk with the museum's current virtual exhibitor, Yeefah Thurman, of the exhibit Blackness in the Diaspora. Now, Hammock created online virtual exhibitions back in 2020 to expand its reach to Haitian and diasporic artists from Chicago and beyond. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about the museum. The Haitian American Museum of Chicago was founded in 2012 by Elsie Hector Hernandez to change the negative perceptions and stereotypes about Haiti and its people. Through programming, exhibitions, and community initiatives, the museum educates on the vibrancy of Haiti as well as its complex history. As some of you may know, in 2021, 2022, there were images of Black and Haitian migrants being met on horseback at our southern border by customs enforcement. Now, the museum, all the way in Chicago, saw it as our responsibility to do something for these individuals. At that time, the museum became the newest member of the Chicago Legal Protection Fund and Illinois Access to Justice, which is in collaboration with the National Immigrant Justice Center. Now we are able to provide Know Your Rights presentations and legal immigration referrals for things like asylum, TPS, or temporary protected status, work permits, green cards, and citizenship. Hammock is more than a typical museum. We are a proactive member of our community. In November 2025, Hammock purchased a building, our permanent home, and we are currently in transition into that new space with a grand reopening date of Saturday, March 21st. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A with Yeefah. Now, throughout the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. You can also use the raised hand feature during the Q&A and be called on to ask your question. Closed captions have been turned on for accessibility, and we are recording this meeting for future use, promotion, and archiving. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our artist for tonight. Yeefah Thurman is a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and facilitator dedicated to fostering belonging and equity through art, advocacy, and community engagement. Rooted in cultural heritage of the African diaspora, her work spans visual art and racial healing facilitation to bridge cultural divides and create inclusive spaces. Her art practice is rooted in an autoethnographic exploration of Black history, ancestry, and cultural memory. Everyone, please welcome Yeefah Thurman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to need a few seconds for the transition to getting the slides up, so bear with us with that for a moment. We tested it out, but sometimes with technology. All right, so I am going to share my screen and then, okay. So can you do it? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen big. Awesome. All right, let me get my notes together. Again, thank everyone. I see so many familiar faces. I'm so excited to share this with you all. This is my first solo exhibition, so I'm really proud of this show. It took me 9 years to make these images, but the raison d'être for this exhibit and the existence of these images is a lifetime of inquiry. This evening, I want to take you on a journey. I'll start off by talking about where my inspiration comes from. I'll talk about select images from the exhibit in detail. And finally, we'll have time for questions and to talk about the exhibit. As an autoethnographic artist, uh, autoethnography is at the base of my practice. An autoethnographer is someone who seeks meaning and understanding about culture and politics and social norms from a personal perspective. The core of my work is based on in these principles. The sociologist C. Wright Miles once said, "Neither the life of an individual nor the history of society can be understood without understanding both." In trying to understand myself, I am seeking to understand Blackness wherever it exists, and in doing so, I'm hoping to ignite in the viewer a feeling of arousal, a feeling of wonder, and a desire to ask questions to know more about what I have learned. I grew up in a home where Blackness was centered. Our home was full of Black art, Black literature, and were exposed to acclaimed Black figures. My father is pictured in the first image on the screen, the family image. He started the first Black brokerage firm on Wall Street. And my mother, also in that image, was the co-founder with my father of the first Black heritage school in New York City called the Patterson School. My grandmother, the second image, was a civil rights activist. And my parents were friends with many, many acclaimed Black people in the New York City area and around, including Percy Sutton, who is next to my grandmother, a civil rights lawyer and politician, Charlene Hunter Galt, who is a journalist on the McNeil-Lehrer Report and PBS, and a civil rights activist herself, and really great friends with my mother, Carl McCall, a politician and the first Black state comptroller, and Arthur Ashe, although he was not friends with my family, he came to visit my tennis school frequently. And he is the first United States Davis Cup team, Black person to be on the Davis team, and the only Black man to win the Wimbledon, Australian Open, and the US Open in the singles division. But despite all of these amazing positive imagery, the culture of whiteness remained the dominant narrative. My favorite shows were Mary Tyler Moore, Bye Bye Birdie, and Charlie's Angels. These images glorified a culture that was not completely mine. This led to feelings of inadequacy. Why didn't my hair flip and sway like Mary Tyler Moore's? Why did my clothing look differently on my body? My Black world seemed small and not enough. But at the age of 10 years old, my parents took me to see Black Orpheus. Black Orpheus is an adaptation of the Greek tragedy Orpheus and Eurydice. It's directed by Marcel Camus, and it takes place in Brazil. It's in a favela which is an urban settlement traditionally where Black Brazilians live. And it opened up for me the microcosm of Black life, and its existence no longer felt small, it felt expansive. It exposed me to the interconnectedness of Africans in the diaspora. And I saw myself in the Black faces of the characters on the screen. Blackness was no longer limited to the Black experience in America. Photography informed my practice. And although I consider myself to be a multidisciplinary artist, and most of my recent works are sculptural installations, photography helped me define my practice. It helped me to develop storytelling and visual acuity, and it allowed me to be an observer. This exhibit is about my observations of Black life in the diaspora. It's about my connection to my distant cousins and how that connection feeds my soul and brings clarity to the meaning of my life. In 2017, I met this beautiful man. We developed a relationship, and he became an important element in the decision to start documenting my interactions in the African diaspora. I had set a goal for myself to travel one place every year outside of the US, and he was interested in doing the same thing with one caveat. I want to go where people look like me. That was what he said. On our second trip, we went to Cuba. On our first day in Cuba, we set out to explore the environs. But how were we going to get around? I told Chris that I had heard that we can stand on the side of the road and someone will pick us up. So when El Ricky stopped, I assumed he knew what was happening. El Ricky took us to our destination. We gave him a few pesos and he offered Chris Viagra. And he invited us to dinner at their home. We exchanged numbers. I took his picture. We called him the next day, but we never finalized our plans. Later, Chris told me he had no idea that we were hitchhiking. Growing up in New York City, I was exposed to public transportation at an early age. The trains and the buses gave me the ability to move around the city limitlessly. Now, wherever I travel, I want to experience in that place public transportation. In Havana, we rode the bus for 40 cents. Everywhere I looked, I saw Black people. The way she wore her head wrap reminded me of a time in my life when I wore head wraps to connect with my African identity. In the movie Black Orpheus, there is a scene where Orpheus has the chance to see Eurydice. She has died. In the Greek tragedy, Orpheus goes to the underworld to get her and must not turn back to look at her or he'll lose her forever. The director uses a religious ceremony within the Brazilian religion, candomblé is it's called, as an adaptation of the underworld in the Greek tragedy. This was my first introduction to spiritual practices that arose in Portuguese and Spanish locations from the African diaspora transatlantic slave trade. They are the mixing of Yoruba religions and practices and Catholicism. In Cuba, it's called Santeria. We had the chance to meet a babalawo, which means priest. He was an artist as well. We visited his temple and learned about the religion and way of life. He makes his art as a public statement to bring joy to the neighborhood. I'm just going to interject for a second. Carlos, I'm getting text messages that people are trying to get in.
Yeah, I have everyone in the room that's in the waiting room.
Okay. Meanwhile, when Chris and I were not traveling, we were getting to know each other. We lived in different cities, so we took turns spending time in the other environment, other person's environment. We were in the early parts of our relationship. We wanted to impress each other. It was New Year's Eve, and Chris had made reservations at a fancy restaurant. It was super quiet, and it had a sterile feeling. I was feeling antsy and wanted to cut a rug. For those of you who don't know, that means, get loose. The only place that we could go out into without reservations on New Year's Eve was this bar named Toby's in Waukegan. It was a Black-owned local bar. And as soon as I walked in, I knew right away that this was my place. From then on and after and often as I could, we visited. At Toby's, you can get black eyed peas and collard greens, which is a traditional New Year's Day Black American food that you eat New Year's Day, and it brings you good luck and prosperity. And you can get them in to-go containers New Year's Eve so that you can eat it New Year's Eve day. At Toby's, I saw Black Americans showing each other love and connection. The dap and the slap. Everyone talked about during Obama's presidency his code switching, his ability to change cultural norms easily. In the same meeting, he would shake hands with a white person and give a Black man some dap. Giving dap is a form of greeting that developed during segregation by Black soldiers in the Vietnam War. The soldiers created a way of greeting each other that was meant to signify, I see you. We are in this together, despite being looked at as inferior. We have pride in who we are. This is a style of greeting which often involves a handshake with a hug-like gesture and often includes a slap on the back. This image captures the beginning of the dap. I overheard my son one day talking with his white friend on the phone. He kept using the N word with his friend. Within many Black American circles, the N word has been reclaimed to mean my friend, my buddy, my pal. It's used in an endearing manner, but in this situation, he was talking with a white friend. And he was using the word to talk about his white friend as his buddy. I kept silent as I listened, and I was thinking all the time, "Ooh, my ancestors are probably rolling over in their grave, listening to him use this word in this manner." And then I started to think, you know, what would make young people want to use this word in that way? And I decided to interview young people who were 5 generations removed from slavery and 3 generations removed from the civil rights era. I interviewed 10 young people between the ages of 18 and 30. And I asked them, what does the N word mean to you? Ben said, my opinion is if I know you personally, I'll let it slide. So he felt like anyone could use the word. Like it doesn't have the same kind of meaning that it did for enslaved people. I think today, if I were to ask him, I believe he's changed his opinion. This is my other son, and he told me once that he could never really tell me what it was like to be a Black man. And he told me on this day many stories of things that had happened to him that I had never known. Like, for instance, when he was a bike messenger and all the bike messengers used to meet up in a particular place at one of the metro stations for chatting and resting and eating their lunch. And one day he fell asleep with some of the other bike messengers. And when he awoke, he was in handcuffs. And you would think, okay, this is the 2000s. I think this happened to him in 20, just before 2020. And you would think that seems kind of odd, but this is something that was happening to him quite frequently, that he's getting stopped for what you would think is no reason. He said, when I asked him about the word in one of his interviews, he said, if I could go back in time without messing and changing anything about today's life, I would go back and change that word from ever being used. In 2022, I was accepted to an artist residency. It was a research residency in Puebla, Mexico. It was interesting to me because I wanted to connect with Afro-Mexican population, and I had been wanting to do this for a really long time. Brazil has the largest population of Black descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, which many people don't know, but outside of Africa, it has the largest population of Black folks. And I was interested in what does it look like to be a Black person in a place smaller than the United States, a place smaller than the UK, a place smaller than Brazil. And Afro-Mexicans had come across my radar by a photographer who had specialized and lived with Afro-Mexicans. And this was something that I was really interested in. So I wanted to get to know their culture and understand what was similar and different from my culture. I met Oscar after I got accepted to the artist residency virtually online through Instagram by typing in Afro-Mexican. And we started conversations for about 6 months before I went to the artist residency. It happened to be COVID, and I was not able to go to the residency at the actual time. So it was 6 months time in between when I was accepted and when I was able to go. So we were developing a friendship. And he was my point of contact when I arrived. However, he lived in Mexico City, which is not really where the Afro-Mexican communities are. And I was interested in really living in those communities and being around Afro-Mexicans. I went on to the residency, which was in Puebla, Mexico, and the artist residency hosts were trying to connect me with the places in the coastal areas, which is where the Afro-Mexican communities usually are, but they were having no luck. And I was about to give up and change my whole idea of what the residency was about. And I went out and about in the town and ended up in this pop-up thrift store. And I was t talking with the one of the little pop-up shop owners, and I said, I'm looking now for a costume because I've changed the trajectory of my artist residency. And they said, "Oh, well, what were you originally going to do?" And I said, "Well, I am looking to connect with Afro-Mexicans." And they said, "Oh, our friend Oscar is Afro-Mexican. We have to introduce you to him." So they said, "Come back the next day and he'll be there." And I thought, "Okay, I'll do it, but can I have a number or something? How am I going to make sure that he's really going to show up?" But I came back the next day with my camera and my recording device, and Oscar was there. And we ended up hanging out that day, and then he really wanted to meet up with me and help me on my journey. So we spent the next day, full day together, and he told me all about his experience as an Afro-Mexican, and he told me about his family, and he connected me with the elders in the Afro-Mexican community in Veracruz, Costa Chica area. And that's how I met Vicente. And Vicente is an elder in the Costa Chica region of uh, Mexico, which is in Veracruz, in a small town called Mata Clara. And he is a teacher there and also an advocate for Afro-Mexicans. And this is his family, his mother, his aunt, and his cousin and his sister. And they took me into their homes while I was there. He showed me around to not only his family, but all of the other community members in that town. And everyone fed me, gave me coffee. I was speeding because I had so much coffee and cake but it was so lovely. It was such a wonderful experience, and I will never forget it. And he sends me updates about his family and about advocacy that's happening in the Afro-Mexican community. In 2024, I went to Austria. And actually, let me back up. In 2020, my daughter left to move to Austria. She was born there. And a few years later, she and her friend, a trans Black woman, were getting out of a train station to go to a photo shoot, and they were attacked. And my daughter was injured. Her tooth was broken. They were not helped by anyone. Later on, several people said that they called the cops, but they didn't feel comfortable getting involved. And this was so scary for me, being away and outside of the country from where she is and being so far away, I couldn't do anything. When I went to visit her a couple of years later, I met up with her and her trans friend, who is sitting in this picture, Angel. And we were going to go to a Horige. In Austria, a Horige is a wine vineyard with new wine, which is different than generally the kinds of wines that you are accustomed to, which are fermented. But it's a very important social, creative way that the Austrians have created their wines. And it's something that you want to do when you go to Austria. And we go on this trip, and we had to take 3 buses. Austria is in a round instead of on a grid system. So this is in the 19th district. So you have to go first district, second district, third district. So we took a bus and a bus and a train and a train. And we finally get to where we think our destination is. We get out the bus, and her friend Angel looks around and says, "This is not where we're supposed to be." And we turn around to get back on the bus or to ask questions, and you have to push the button in Austria to open the door. And when we pushed the button, the door opened, and Angel asked the bus driver, "Oh, how do we get to this place we're trying to go to?" In perfect Austrian Viennese dialect. And the bus driver slammed the door on our face. And we were all shocked. And then I couldn't believe it. So I opened the door again and asked in my broken Viennese German the same question. This time, the driver's getting red in the face, and he refuses to answer our question and just keeps staring off at us. And I did the same thing again. He closed the door, and I just, for shits and giggles, I did it again just to annoy him. But you could see that he clearly didn't want to have anything to do with a Black trans woman and a Black American woman and a biracial woman. Like that was just too much for him. At the same time, I had experienced on the bus a woman, well, I couldn't see who it was, but that person was being told, "Go back to your country, go back to your country. You have no business being here," on a crowded bus, and nobody was doing anything about it. So I couldn't believe that that was what was happening, because when I had lived in Austria, I had not experienced any of these things. And so my question was, how can I find out what's going on? Why is this so different for Black people now? And I applied for a fellowship with the Pulitzer Center and was awarded the grant to be able to go there. And I spent 3 weeks there interviewing people to find out if the rise of right-wing politics has changed the climate for Black people and especially Black queer people. And one of the people that I interviewed was Moyo, and they are an advocate in the Black queer community. And they told me mostly about how what's really important for the Black community right now is to create a kind of care for each other. And that Moyo is really intent on creating these spaces where Black queer people can have help. So monetarily, most of them are not having jobs. And that leads to then not having food or not having an apartment, not having a place to stay. And she is a performance artist and an advocate and creates these spaces for people to have money donated so that she can help the queer community. And what's so important about this is that I went in there thinking that to Austria, thinking that people were going to be protesting and rising up and doing all these things to make a change when after each person that I talked to, they were tired of the protesting. They were tired of being assaulted. They were tired of being driven away by the Austrians, that they became more insulated within each other and they were protecting each other. How can we protect each other? How can we bring ourselves together? And this is one of the things that she does. And I love this image of her because she embodies this sort of spirit of flight and being free, but she is a go-getter to help the community. And that was something that I learned that was really important to me as a person who is an artist going into communities and going into places where I am observing. It's like I'm thinking about my own way of how I might deal with something or how the Black American experience might be, but I have to kind of remove myself in a way, looking at it from myself, but also how is their experience similar and different from mine? And what does that do to me? How does that fill me up? And how can that fill up other people? And how can other people learn from the experiences around the world? And specifically, Black experiences around the world. And that's sort of the culmination of what this exhibit has been for me is how do I connect with Blackness in the diaspora? And then how can I connect other people to Blackness in the diaspora? As I said in the beginning of the presentation, for me, this is an important view on other cultures. How can we be loving on each other, accepting of each other? And we can do this by knowing about other cultures. And one thing I want to do is bring that to people that may not have that opportunity to be aware of what's happening with Black queer people in Austria, what's happening in Cuba, where you can just stick your thumb out and get a ride and maybe get some Viagra. What's happening in Mexico with the Afro-Mexican community. And I feel like this exhibit, this is just a short, condensed version where you're just looking at a few of the images. And I would love for you to, after, if you haven't seen the full exhibit, to go in and see all the pictures. There are about 30 pictures in the exhibit. And I think it's just amazing. And I'm so thankful that you all were able to come and participate in my talk, and I'm going to put this last slide up, which gives you contact information for me with my website. On my website, you can see my other art, which, as I said, is more sculptural and in nature. And you can also see me on Instagram. This is one of my latest pieces, which is called Freedom. And this is an assemblage piece that is really special to me because it talks about the interconnectedness of our different spirits, like the one that is pushing us forward and the one that is bringing us back. And yeah, I would love for you all to connect with me through my website and Instagram, and I will open up now for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yeefah. I did put the full exhibit into the chat, so whether you're looking at it right now or bookmark it for later, definitely take some time to check out the additional photographs that are part of that wonderful exhibition. It will be featured at the museum until the end of March, so there is a lot of time to check it out. Yes, Q&A. If you do have any questions that you'd like me to relay to Yifa, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Otherwise, if you do have a question and you feel comfortable coming off of mute, feel free to do that as well.
What? No, I have a question.
Yeah, please. I
I
think
think
it's
Do
you're
do you have do you have any new pieces that you're working on in regards to the same um, category as this?
as far as photography, I'm not working on any new pieces of photography, but I am right now trying to get back to Mexico. I'm working on writing up a grant to work with the queer community in Mexico and use my racial healing and somatic practices to create a workshop that would train Black queer people on somatic practices and racial healing to help them to be able to. We know that somatic practices help people to be able to withstand different kinds of trauma. And so I would like to gift that to the community to help them to be able to withstand the different kinds of trauma that they're experiencing. For instance, the Afro-Mexicans are stopped more frequently than white Mexicans because they are assumed not to be Mexican citizens. They're assumed to be from Cuba or from Dominican Republic or something like that because Afro-Mexican history is not told in schools. And even Afro-Mexicans didn't even know that they had a connection to Africa originally. They were told that they were indigenous. And so it's just recently that they're really connecting to their African roots and understanding uh, the necessity for pride because they have been marginalized. And they were only recognized as a community in 2020 or 2022 which would help them to be able to get certain kinds of assistance from the government once you're recognized as a community, like an indigenous community, and meaning Indigenous American Native. So for me, this is a continuous work, not just through photos and photography, but through other ways and that I use my artistic practices to connect within the African diaspora. And that's something that I'm working on now.
we
Thank
do
you
have
for
a
your
question.
answer.
Definitely. We
Uh-huh.
do have a question in the chat from Ema asking, can you talk about the piece that is now being displayed? I
Yeah,
believe the one.
this piece was for a an exhibit called Women in Nature Taking Up Space. And the idea was, that women usually make themselves small. Society teaches us to be small. And how can we use our artistic practices to express what it's like to take up space? And through our connection with nature, which oftentimes is symbolized as a woman and the creation of the world. And what I want, I'm still in my connection with my Blackness. I wanted to show how my connection to nature, specifically the hair on this um, shadow person, is from cotton. And on my father's side, my great grandfather was an enslaved man who escaped slavery with his entire family, which is an incredible feat. And so I have a lot of pride in this chutzpah that he had to be able to, he and his son left one plantation that they had been sold to get back to the plantation where his wife and daughter were. And they, for periods of time, stayed with Union soldiers, and the Union soldiers wanted to take his son to freedom, but he said, "No, I want to keep my family together." So when they became free, they continued to be farmers, and it's to me like the heritage of cotton and the legacy of cotton is similar to the idea of reclaiming the positive parts of cotton farming in the Black community. There is a man who is now a fourth generation cotton farmer, which fifth generation cotton farmer, which I would be if we were still farming. And this is a part of our legacy, and I wanted to show that as part of my legacy, as well as my connection to the earth. And these circles that are on my legs are all of the meaningful parts of my existence, my family and my friends who have lifted me up and helped me to be who I am. The the sticks on my legs are just showing how I'm grounded in nature. And like I said, the one underneath body is a shadow version of myself that wants to sometimes take over and not and tell me that I'm not good enough. But there is always this better side of me that I can draw on from my heritage, from the pride I have in my ancestry and the people that have lifted me up. And on the right side is a mantra that says, always remember freedom. Freedom is your birthright. And it's written in black, red, and green, which are the Pan-African flag colors. And those colors stand for red for the blood of the people, green for the land that was stolen, and black for the people.
Thank you. That was great.
There is another question in the chat. Lerma, I would like to ask a question about Austria. So you can go ahead, Lerma, please.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to know, do you find the growing anti-immigrant sentiment a part of the problem with the resistance to accepting Black people or different people? Did you find that to be the case in Austria?
Definitely. And I think that was the situation on the bus, that they assumed that this person was an immigrant, and the person kept shouting, "Go back to where you come from or came from," not knowing whether this person was born in Austria or not. And I think that it is definitely becoming more of an issue. Well, let's say that it might have always been an issue, because now from my research, I'm understanding that the Austrian people believed always in a sort of insular, homogenous system, even when they became an empire and they took over Hungary. They those people were not really accepted as Austrians, but they also believed in a kind of quiet way that you do that. But now there's a different kind of person that is leading the way in this emboldened, um, outright, spoken way of ostracizing people that did not happen when I was there. And that seems to be more dangerous because it was more like, well, we don't accept you, but we're not really going to do very much to you. Whereas now it's like very prevalent and in your face. And a civil servant would not have, when I got on the bus, when I lived in Austria to ask for directions, I would not have gotten that treatment. I never got that treatment. But now a civil servant feels that they have the right to to turn you away, and that's their job. They need to be separating their job from their belief system, and now they don't feel like they have to. So I think there is a mixture of the the history and legacy of racism and an anti-immigrant sentimentality and this new way of speaking out, and which is different than the cultural norm of Austrian society. And one thing about the history to note is that the first Black person that is historically documented in Austria, his name is Angelo Soliman, and he was an enslaved person that was brought to Austria to be a toy for a contessa. And what I mean by a toy is that oftentimes during this era, Black people were bought by people in the court and were taught the ways of that country, the language, the instruments. They were taught to play an instrument or to sing. And then they were brought into social settings to perform. Like you might bring a pet to perform tricks. And so he was bought by this Contessa. Eventually he was freed and he lived in the court society and married a white Austrian woman. And you would think maybe he lived a decent life, but he had been stolen from his land, so how decent is your life in actuality? But he had a daughter, and then when he died, they stuffed his body and put him on display in a museum. So there is a deep kind of thinking about other people as not being human, as being animalistic, that you can stuff like you would a deer, that is passed down in the Austrian society, but wasn't so outright and spoken the way it is now. And so that was different. And I appreciate the way that the Black queer community is rallying around each other, because to experience those things every day is tiring. And I know, Lerma, you're my aunt, and you marched during the civil rights movement, and so you can understand how tiring and frustrating that must be. And I kind of have a question in my own mind about your generation and the ability to withstand the traumas that you faced, which is actually another research component for anyone who has been following my school journey. I am writing a thesis to graduate, and my thesis is about what I'm talking about now, is how is it that people from my aunt and my mother's generation were able to continue. Lerma, you were arrested how many times?
I'm sorry. I don't know, like maybe 13 or something. I really can't remember the number. It was enough to get me sentenced to reform school.
So 13 times, enough to get her possibly sentenced to reform school,
Not
and
possibly, totally.
totally
I was
sentenced to
I was
reform.
totally sentenced to reform school, but I never had to actually go. They
Okay.
put a stay on the order, and then we ended up notching some wins, and the attorney had to go back and clear that record.
Okay. So how is it that your generation, my question and my query and my thesis that I'm writing is about how could that be that you and your generation were able to keep going after being arrested 13 times? Like that's a lot, like it's a mental and physical strain versus now. And I think a lot of it has to do with somatic practices, the practices, and I'm talking about practices in the church, praying and singing as part of a somatic practice. And that is something that is often missing now in society for younger people. And I think that the way that the younger Austrian community is dealing with that is by creating these places of care that people can come and get to feel safe so that when they are out and about in Austria, in the society, getting on the train and somebody is bothering them, they can retreat back to these places of care. So yes, there is a change in the climate that also related to anti-immigrant sentimentality, but it's also deeply rooted in the racist culture of Austria.
Another question we have here in the chat, how do you balance photographing subjects with interviewing them? Is it a shoot first and interview later approach or vice versa?
So I think it depends on the context. Sometimes, I meet someone and we're talking first, and then, I'm taking notes, and then I'm like, oh, this person is interesting. I want to interview them more, and I want to take a picture. So that sometimes I'm getting a little bit of information about them first, and then I go in to have an interview with them. And I like interviewing people sometimes first if I haven't had a preliminary conversation with them because they feel safer with me. And then the photos end up being more natural than if I start shooting first because there is a sense of people then performing for the camera instead of being natural as if the camera is their friend or just an extension of me. So I guess I would say I prefer to befriend a person first, have conversation with them before taking an image if it's an interview. But a lot of these images are street photography in Cuba. So those images are just random. Some of them, others like El Ricky are intentional. The bus one of the woman in the bus, that was I didn't know her.
Thank you. This one is kind of more of a statement on something that was mentioned during the presentation. This individual says, "Great job. It was a great talk." There was a little bit of a language barrier for this individual. So when you were mentioning the pill that was, handed to you all from the street, just mentioning that, they would discard it in any country or foreign country, but a little bit of the language barrier there from that story.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't use it. We had such a great laugh about that for years. Like because of course never take a pill from a random person, but yeah, Viagra in the language barrier is a drug to help you have better sex if you're a man. And so he felt that El Ricky kept saying to, in his broken English and Spanish, here, take this. You need this for tonight when you go home. That was quite funny. But yeah, he didn't take it. But yeah, I would say that we were so impressed, not necessarily impressed, but the Cuban people, especially the Black Cuban people, were so welcoming and friendly and wanting to take us into their homes. And, as an American, I mean, it was bad enough, I guess, that we were hitchhiking or that Chris didn't know that we were hitchhiking. I knew we were hitchhiking, but you could not do that here in the United States. And you could not just go to a random person's home. You land off a plane, you go to your Airbnb, and then you stick out your thumb and you meet someone, and then they're like, "Hey, now come to my home." You couldn't do that in the United States. But we had really great experiences in Cuba with the people that we met and everybody being very welcoming. The place where we stayed, the husband was a deep diving fisherman. So he went down with his, I guess, a spear or something, deep diving and brought us a fish for dinner. So we had really great experiences.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. If anyone else wants the last question before we wrap it up for tonight.
I have a question.
No?
This is Ima Jamel. Are you going to continue with your photography as well as your art, such as the one you just is showing on the screen, and or are you going to what are you going to focus on going forward?
So photography is always going to be a part of my practice. It's sort of what grounds me because it's a branch or a root of my practice. Like I said, it is how I initially saw the world of art when I was getting back into making art. And it really helped me to think about storytelling and to think about visual acuity. So, how things are placed on a canvas or how things are placed in a room. And it will always be a part of what I'm doing. I have used it in different ways. The circles on the piece that is there now are all photographs. So, as a close up, you would see them in real life. If you see the piece, they're all photographs of the different people and times in my life that have lifted me up. And in one of my first pieces, that was one of my first sculptures, uh, I used photography facing myself. So I was behind the camera. And in the similar vein of Cindy Sherman, and Cindy Sherman is a female photographer, very famous female photographer who uses prosthetics and ways of dressing herself up to have social commentary about the way women are seen. And I used my body dressed in colonial attire and dressed in Afrofuturism attire, and also in the nude to depict a flag that I created that talked about the indoctrination of Black people in America from believing and knowing about their past to then believing that the way in which the colonial times were was the right way. And so I will continue always to use photography as a part of what I'm doing in my art in different capacities, and sometimes just photography itself, but mostly it's interwoven into my work.
Thank you.
And that piece actually is on my website. You can see that piece on my website. It's called What You See, What We See. Cheryl, you've seen that piece. That was the outdoor piece.
Do you have pieces for sale?
I do. The prints are for sale from the exhibit. You can contact me and I'll give you different rates from 8 by 10s all the way up to as large as you would like, as large as possible you would like. And yeah, so right now the prints are for sale, and I'm open to commissions as well for other pieces.
And thank you so much. And I did just again put in the link to the exhibit that is online at Hammock's website. There is a specific tab there as well if you are looking to purchase prints, and definitely make sure to reach out to Yeefah for those beautiful pieces. As we wrap up tonight, Yeefah, I really want to say thank you so much for the artist talk, and thank you for bringing photography and your photography to the museum and within the Haitian and diaspora conversations and programming that we do. It really has been a pleasure working with you, and I'm so glad that we were able to have the conversation to go a little bit more in depth this evening. And of course, everyone who joined us, thank you for being here on this Friday evening. We really appreciate it. Really quick before we go, I just want to let you know of two programs that are actually coming up for the museum next week, happening on the same day. We do double duty a lot here at the museum, but we want to make sure our programs are accessible for all. So next Friday, February 20th, in Bronzeville on the south side, we will be hosting our monthly Compa Soiree in collaboration with DJ France and Norman Bolden of Norman's Bistro. Compa is a genre of Haitian music and dance. It's a really great fun night of community, music, food. Again, that's happening at Room 43 in Bronzeville from 7 to 11 p.m. And again, that same day, we are having a artist, rather not artist talk. We are having a book signing for our newly published book with Arcadia Publishing called Haitians in Chicago, which celebrates the accomplishments and contributions of Haitians in Chicago from Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable to the next generation of Haitians. Now that will be at Charmers Cafe in Evanston from 6:30 to 8 p.m. So no matter where you are in the Chicagoland area, a really great way to engage with the museum next week. If you do have any additional questions for the museum or for the artist, please make sure to reach out. Again, thank you so much for being here this evening. Have a great weekend. It's supposed to be a little bit warmer in Chicago if you're here. Enjoy that weekend, and we hope to see you again at another museum event in the future. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.